Coming up on the Flatland Sports Podcast, we preview the upcoming Red Raider season. Also, the SEC has announced they'll be going to 9 conference games. What does it all mean? All that and more.
And now,
what is this?
I know you're gonna dig this.
This is the Flatland Sports Podcast.
Where do you come from? Lubbock, Texas?
Lubbock, Texas.
A place called Lubbock.
I wonder if they think I'm so gorgeous back in Lubbock.
What do you care about Lubbock? You're big time now.
I'm just a little homesick, that's all.
Is that what you want, Larry, to spend the night in Lubbock, Texas at a day's inn with a $15 voucher from Cinnabon?
Lubbock? No, it's near Lubbock.
What's it like there?
It's flat, real flat. You stand on a coffee can, you can see Colorado.
Happy Monday. This is the Flatland Sports Podcast, available on YouTube and Spotify. I am Christopher Johnston. It's game week in West Texas as the Red Raiders are set to take on Arkansas Pine Bluff this Saturday from Jones AT&T Stadium to kick off one of the most anticipated seasons since 2008. A season in which Texas Tech went 11-1 and found itself on the doorstep of a national championship game appearance. Is this the year? We'll discuss what it will take for the Red Raiders to make a national championship run this year. The SEC also announced that they will be moving to a 9-game conference schedule after decades of procrastination. How did they get there, and what does it mean for the college football playoff and the college football world? But first, Red Raiders in action. Texas Tech soccer traveled to California this week to take on Santa Clara as well as the University of San Francisco. Red Raiders left Santa Clara with a 2-1 win over the Broncos, Peyton Parsons and Taylor Zujiski scoring both goals in the first 10 minutes of the match. Unfortunately, the Red Raiders also suffered their first loss of the season this week with a 2-0 shutout at the hands of the University of San Francisco. Texas Tech soccer will be back in action this Thursday when they take on the SMU Mustangs at home. Now, moving on to our top segment, the Red Raiders are set to kick off the 2025 campaign this Saturday from Jones AT&T Stadium. As a 6:30 kickoff. You can watch the game on ESPN Plus, or, as I do, you can listen to the dulcet tones of Brian Jensen, John Harris, and Chris Level from the Texas Tech Sports Network. This kicks off what has been the most anticipated season for Texas Tech football since perhaps the 2008 season, following an offseason in which Texas Tech turned some heads on the national level after signing the number 1 ranked portal class in the country, as well as multiple 5-star recruits on the high school level for the 2026 and 2027 class. People all over college football and all over the college football world have predicted everything for Texas Tech, from a national championship to a Jimbo Fisher-esque crash and burn. So let's take a look at the upcoming season line by line and discuss what needs to happen this season to be considered a success. And what is considered a success? If you ask Joey McGuire, it is a Big 12 championship and a college football playoff berth. And if you really ask him, he's probably going to tell you it's a national championship win. But we'll start with the first quarter, the non-conference portion of the schedule. Texas Tech has Arkansas Pine Bluff, Kent State, and Oregon State. All at home. Texas Tech needs to go 3-0 in this stretch, which shouldn't be considered a huge ask. But Texas Tech hasn't gone undefeated in the non-conference schedule since 2021. The non-conference slate is very favorable this year. There are no trap games like Wyoming in 2023. You get every game at home. The toughest game in your stretch is Oregon State. Last season, you lost to Wazoo on the road, and I'll tell you, last season, Wazoo was still a Power 5 team that happened to be playing in a G6 conference. Oregon State is now pretty firmly a G6 team playing in a G6 conference. Last season, they finished 5-7 playing in the Pac-12, but essentially as an independent playing a Mountain West schedule. Oregon State is a team that you should beat soundly, especially by week 3. By then, you've got the bugs worked out. There's no surprises. Nobody's going to sneak up on you in week 3. Now, quarter 2 marks the beginning of Big 12 play. You start out on the road at Utah, at Houston after a bye week, and then back home for homecoming against Kansas. Utah, probably one of the most intriguing matchups of the year. The Utes entered the Big 12 expecting to steamroll the conference on their way to an imaginary Big 10 invitation. Instead, the Utes finished 5-7 overall and 2-7 last season and lost their starting quarterback to an injury and medical retirement. Are the Utes gearing up for a comeback this season, or was last season an indication that the Utes' best days are behind them? Either way, if Texas Tech has its sights on a Big 12 championship, this is a game that, in my opinion, you have to win. Because either Utah is a conference championship contender and you have an opportunity to pick up a strong road win early in the season before the Utes really find their footing, before they really break in their new quarterback and everything else. And if they aren't, if they're set to crash and burn again this season, then this is a team that you should beat regardless. Now, Rice Eccles is a tough place to play. You'll be at elevation again, which wasn't the Red Raiders' friend the last 2 seasons when you traveled to Wyoming and again to BYU. After this game, though, you get a break with an off week before traveling again to Houston to face what I think will be an improved Cougar squad from last season. You have another opportunity to pick up a solid road win, as I believe Houston, while better, they're probably looking at a 6-6 or a 7-5 season. After that, you come home to face the Kansas Jayhawks for homecoming. Kansas looked really, really good in their game in week 0. That said, they were also playing absolutely nobody. Now, they are back home. They're not playing in a parking lot like they were last year or playing in an empty Arrowhead Stadium. They will be better. They will be a tougher competition. But this is a game that I would expect you, if you are a Big 12 championship contender and possibly a college football playoff contender, this is a game that you should absolutely win. So Texas Tech, through the first 3 games of the conference series, you should be going 3-0, meaning that at this point of the season, as you arrive to essentially halftime of the season, you are 6-0 undefeated. You could maybe survive dropping 1 to Utah, but it would be a huge missed opportunity. Now, as we move on to quarter 3, this presents the toughest stretch of the Red Raiders schedule, as Tech gets Arizona State on the road, Oklahoma State at home, Kansas State in Manhattan. Arizona State, the defending Big 12 champions, return most of their starters, minus Cam Scadaboo. Now, that's a big minus. They're going to have a real hard time trying to replace him and his production this year. You beat them last season at home, but you will have to travel to their place this year. They return, like I said, just about everyone. They are more than likely the one of the 2 teams that will wind up in Arlington. Next, you come back home, you face Oklahoma State, which by all appearances is at the tail end of the Mike Gundy era after the Cowboys went 0-9 in Big 12 play last year. They also had an offseason that featured a standoff between Mike Gundy and OSU administration, with Coach Gundy very nearly being shown the door. There was an overnight agreement that came that involved Mike Gundy taking a pay cut. I believe the offensive and defensive coordinators were ousted, and the university administration had to have a say in who was hired. Not a good thing for a successful coach to go through. All that said, it would be the most Mike Gundy thing ever for the Cowboys to turn around and go 9-3 this season. We've seen it before. We've seen Mike Gundy years where you think the Cowboys are out, where you think they're done, and then they come back and are playing Texas in a Big 12 championship game with a 9-3 record somehow. Now, the good news is you get Oklahoma State at home, and you get them at a time of year where they shouldn't be able to sneak up on you if Gundy gets them rolling. If you were, at least in past Texas Tech teams, there would have been plenty of times where you get Oklahoma State early, and the expectation is that they're not going to be very good, and then Mike Gundy has them turned into a Big 12 caliber team, and they just blindside you early in the season. You're not going to have that this year. By this point, by the time you face the Cowboys, you're going to know who they are and what to be expecting. Now, after that game, the Red Raiders travel to Manhattan to take on the Kansas State Wildcats, a team that you have not beaten you haven't beaten at all since 2015, which was one of Patrick Mahomes season. And you haven't beaten them in Manhattan since, I believe, the Mike Leach era. Another team that's projected to be a conference championship candidate, despite dropping their season opener to Iowa State and Ireland, a game where the Matt Wells offense was everything we hoped it would be and more. Now, that said, I don't think what we saw last Saturday is any indication of what Kansas State will be this season, and Manhattan is a tough place to play regardless. This is probably the most important stretch of the season, as you have your two toughest opponents on their schedule, both of them on the road. Not to mention, it's October, which historically has been Joey McGuire's worst month. I believe going 1-3 in the month of October every single year that he's been at Texas Tech. So to get to a CFP, to get to a Big 12 championship game, you're going to have to reverse that trend, and Texas Tech needs to go 2-1 this stretch. If you want to make an appearance in Arlington, I don't think you can even afford to go 1-2. You have to find a way to beat Oklahoma State at home and then get at least one win between Arizona State and Kansas State. Now moving to the final quarter of the Texas Tech season, Texas Tech has BYU at home, UCF at home, and West Virginia on the road. BYU expected to be a Big 12 contender before losing their starting quarterback after he, and let me check my notes here, violated the university code of honor, and we won't get into the details of how he did that. BYU still has a great team surrounding the quarterback position, and if true freshman Bear Bachmeier can step up, the Cougars can still be a dark horse Big 12 title contender. We should know very well before the game in Lubbock what kind of team BYU turns out to be. I think this schedule so far has been very favorable to Texas Tech, despite being a tough schedule, because the teams that you're facing, you're not going to have a lot of dark horse surprises come out at you. You're not going to have an Oklahoma State team or a BYU team that was expected to be bad that suddenly turns out to be a conference championship contender, like you had with Arizona State and Colorado last year. The next game on the schedule, you got UCF for one final home game of the 2025 regular season. This is probably your most winnable game of the conference schedule. UCF will be at the front end of a major rebuild. Now they'll be at the end of their season. They might be broken down, beat down. They might be looking for a spark to carry them into next season. You finish the season on the road in Morgantown against the West Virginia Mountaineers, another team that is looking at a major rebuild under Rich Rodriguez's first season. Both these teams are expected to finish at the bottom of the conference, but like I said, you could be looking at potential trap games for either of these as they're trying to get a statement win in year one of their coaching administrations. Now in the final stretch, Texas Tech, if you want to get to a Big 12 championship game and a potential college football playoff berth, you need to go 3-0 in this stretch as well. So as it stands, going back through the schedule, 11-1 is the magic number. Now this isn't a prediction as much as it's a roadmap. This is what, in my opinion, it will take Texas Tech to get to the top of the Big 12. Now in 2008, 11-1 wasn't good enough. That said, last season you finished 8-4. You were one game away from a Big 12 championship berth, so you could realistically be in the college football playoff with a 9-3 record. You just need a lot of things to fall into place. At 11-1, Texas Tech is squarely in the driver's seat and very much alive in the college football playoff conversation. Now let's go on to our next story. This week, the SEC did the unthinkable. After decades of whining, chest thumping, finger pointing, and self-righteous indignation, they announced that they will be moving to a 9-game conference schedule in 2026. So RIP Alabama versus Midwestern Kentucky State games in November. We barely knew ya. This argument has been ongoing for decades. However, the dominoes began to fall very rapidly just this week. It started when the College Football Playoff Committee announced changes to the selection criteria for this upcoming season, as reported by Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports. And I'll go ahead and read the announcement in its entirety. Changes for the upcoming season include enhancements to the tools that the selection committee uses to assess schedule strength and how teams perform against their schedule. The current schedule strength metric has been adjusted to apply greater weight to games against strong opponents. An additional metric, record strength, has been added to the selection committee's analysis to go beyond a team's schedule strength to assess how a team performed against that schedule. This metric rewards teams for defeating high-quality opponents while minimizing the penalty for losing to such teams. Conversely, these changes will provide minimal reward for defeating a lower quality opponent while imposing a greater penalty for losing to such a team. Procedural changes for this year include an update for the recusal policy to establish two separate distinctions: a full recusal, consistent with previous policy, and a partial recusal, which allows the selection committee members to remain in the room for discussions of teams that they are partially recused from, but continue to prevent them from voting during those rounds. At the selection committee, at the direction of the College Football Playoff Management Committee, the membership panel also reviewed the movement of idle teams from the penultimate to the final ranking. The selection committee reaffirmed that the movement in the final week should be evidence-based and did not recommend creating a formal policy prohibiting such movement. Now, this has been a change that the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey has been pushing for since the committee was erroneously left out championship caliber teams such as Alabama, who last year lost to Vanderbilt and then got blown out by a 6-6 Oklahoma team. Never mind the fact that the previous year, Alabama was put ahead of undefeated ACC champion Florida State. The ridiculous thing about the so-called rule change is the fact that the guidelines won't actually specify what high quality and low quality actually is, and we can only assume that high quality is, do you play in the Southeastern Conference, and low quality is, do you not? Meaning the committee is still just as subjective and biased as it always has been. Just now Greg Sankey has a reason to whine if a 9-3 Alabama team gets left out again. This imaginary rule change set the stage for the SEC to go to 9 games. Earlier this summer, the CFP Rules Committee was getting close to finalizing a new 16-team playoff format, which would have featured 4 Big Ten teams, 4 SEC automatic bids, 2 Big 12, 2 ACC teams, and then a group of 5 automatic bid and a handful of at-large bids. This was before Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark threw a wrench in everything by suggesting to just go to a simple 5+1 model, a move that people called him crazy for, but ultimately, as a Big 12 commissioner and as the Big 12 conference, you can't just willingly allow it to be legislated that you're only worth half of what the SEC and Big 10 are. The SEC, of course, was in favor of the 5+11 since everything is rigged in their favor anyway. The Big 10 was heavily against it because at their core, they realized they're no better than the old Pac-12. They just happen to have not just Ohio State, but an Ohio State team who's currently on a run. As part of negotiations with the Big Ten wanted the SEC to go to 9 conference games in order to eliminate the free win. They said they didn't want the 5+11 unless the SEC went to 9 conference games. The SEC was heavily against doing that unless they could get a specific criteria change in the selection process that heavily values strength of schedule. Again, the made-up metric that the SEC gives themselves, and ESPN, who, by the way, operates the college football playoff, gives to the SEC, a.k.a. their greatest moneymaker. So basically, that was point A, the criteria change. We've now arrived at point B, in which the SEC goes from an 8-game schedule to a 9-game conference schedule. It should be noted, too, the SEC is also required by their new change to schedule at least one non-conference game against a Power 4 opponent each season. And so a Big 10, Big 12, ACC, or Notre Dame in any given season has to be on every single SEC's team's schedule, which, by the way, the Big 12 has been doing for decades. The next stop will inevitably be the expansion of the college football playoff to 16 teams. Most likely the 5+11 model. I've heard rumors of a 4+4+3+3 being passed around, but I really wouldn't count on it, especially with the SEC making the concession to go to 9 conference games is a pretty heavy indicator that 5+11 is the way to go, which is a win for the Big 12 and a win for all the schools like Texas Tech. What I would count on is don't think for a second that just because the SEC conceded to going to a 9-game conference schedule, that this is actually a win for everyone. The SEC and Greg Sankey always have and always will have something up their sleeves, and it's never good for the rest of the sport, and certainly never good for the Big 12 conference. Now, one last thing before we go tonight, the Big 12 Texas Tech has released the non-conference schedule for the basketball team. We'll go over that real quick. So the non-conference schedule features Lindenwood on November 4th, Sam Houston on November 7th. You travel to Illinois on November 11th, which was already a known game. At home against Milwaukee, November 14th. The Baha Mar Championship against Wake Forest. That's in the Bahamas. You either get Memphis or Purdue after that as part of that same in-season tournament. Then back home again for New Orleans, Wyoming. Then the US LBM Coast to Coast Challenge, which we discussed in a previous episode. That's against LSU at Dickies Arena in Fort Worth. Back home again for Northern Colorado, and then Winthrop. Now, congratulations to you if you could point out and remember at least two of these teams that I mentioned. They're nobodies. These are not the kind of games that Texas Tech fans want to have in the non-conference at home at the United Supermarkets Arena. Now, I think it's really important for Texas Tech fans to understand, though, that quality opponents, at least as of right now and until something changes, they don't want to travel to Lubbock. As it stands, playing Texas Tech is, for most teams, is the equivalent of just scheduling an automatic loss, especially playing Texas Tech in Lubbock. We all want to have another experience like Kentucky coming to our place, but we've just seen repeatedly over and over again, time and time again, these teams that were on the schedule, such as A&M, such as teams in the Big East that were supposed to come to town, all of them finding a way to back out at the last minute. It's not the schedule. It's not a very sexy schedule. It's not a schedule that is going to turn heads in the non-conference, at least at home. It's not a schedule that's going to sell a lot of tickets. But schedules like this, when you can't get people to come play at home, you're not going to go and just screw yourself over and go travel on the road for free to go play a bunch of people. And even then, you're struggling to find people to agree to play even just a home and away series instead of a home and home. But these games are really developmental games. They start while football season is still going on and go until right about the end of football season when conference play starts. So all in all, they're developmental games. They're kind of like the early NBA season games, or more like just a preseason for the NFL. You develop, you figure out who's going to play what position, and you get rolling before conference play starts. And that's really when college basketball season begins. Now, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. Please like and subscribe to the video, subscribe to the channel. I'm looking for 50 subscribers before I can start doing live videos Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. Until then, we'll continue putting out videos like this. We'll be back on Wednesday to preview Arkansas Pine Bluff and the first game of the Red Raider season. And then after that, I'll be live on Twitter X to give a post-game report and a post-game show. Feel free to stop on by. This is the Flatland Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.